Morning, everyone. My name is Donnel Baird. I'm the CEO of a tech startup called BlocPower, based in Brooklyn. Excited to be here with you all today. Brooklyn in the house. Wherever we are, Brooklyn is there. So what do I want to talk about today? At BlocPower, we talk about turning buildings into Teslas, which is something that we can do. And we think it's one of the most important things that we can do to mitigate the climate crisis. But we have to do it in a way that's equitable. Not because we're like nice people and we're ethical and we're liberals or progressives, but because it's the only path that we have. So we want to talk about turning buildings into Teslas, but doing it in a way that makes buildings and communities smarter, greener, and healthier for all. So my premise that I'll start with is that we won't be able to pass significant climate legislation without leadership and participation from low-income communities and communities of color across America. I think that Senator Manchin has made that clear. What if, for example, we had spent the last 10 years investing in solar manufacturing or green hydrogen R&D in West Virginia? Well, we'd have a climate bill, right? But we didn't do that, so we don't have a climate bill. So support from low-income communities, whether it's urban, rural, white, communities of color, is needed across the country. And we're not doing this because we're like nice people and we're like righteous. We're doing this because there simply is no other strategic path to achieving massive intervention in the climate crisis in the United States without leadership and participation from underserved communities. So whether you disagree or agree with that, I will move into, from that premise, into a little bit of our sense of the problem. So the problem is just as a quick example, there's 125 million buildings across America, but let's talk about the middle-sized buildings, like the building that we're in. We're not inside a skyscraper. It's not the biggest building in Miami, but it's a pretty big building. It's bigger than a house. So there's 5 million of these kinds of buildings around America, and they're really hard to decarbonize. They contribute about 7% of greenhouse gas emissions across the country. Buildings overall contribute over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions across the country. It's a massive problem. It's going to cost $1.2 trillion to fix it. We have a set of solutions, we believe, that are existing. It's not pie in the sky. It's stuff that we can do right now to decarbonize these buildings. One, we're going to identify the all-electric equipment that's going to allow us to rip fossil fuels out of the equipment, out of the buildings, in the same way that Tesla rips fossil fuel engines out of vehicles. We're going to rip fossil fuel heating systems, cooling systems, cooking systems, hot water systems. We're going to rip them out of the building and replace them with 100% all-electric, green energy powered systems. The second thing we're going to do is go to Wall Street and borrow capital to buy the equipment, pay the construction workers and green construction laborers who are going to install this green energy equipment in these 5 million buildings. And we're going to lease that equipment to building owners. The third thing we're going to do is we have a massive shortage of construction workers of any kind across America. So we're going to need to train up a new generation of construction workers. So we're going to identify, finance these green solutions in millions and millions of buildings across America. We're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 30% from the real estate sector to 0. That's something we can do right now. We have a project with the Bezos Earth Fund, which I think is here today. They gave us $6 million to build predictive models of all 125 million buildings across America. So every American will get a free green building score and a free green buildings plan as to how they can turn their own home or church or school or synagogue into a Tesla. And so we've built a mapping tool and a web application that's free for folks to look at that. We've negotiated, I think, $100 million with Goldman Sachs and Microsoft to provide financing for low-income communities to access green energy technology. But last, and where I'll end, is we have started to take responsibility for training low-income communities and communities of color to participate in the green buildings revolution. I think in the last panel you heard a bunch of great stuff about all of the cutting-edge things that are happening. Here's a gentleman in the Bronx. We have trained them on augmented reality building capture. so that not only are we training him on basic construction processes today, but we're training him for the construction processes of the future. You can see his little augmented reality camera on top of his construction hat. So in New York City, Mayor Eric Adams has given us like a $40, $50 million contract to train and hire low-income individuals, about 800 of them, from the highest crime, highest gun violence afflicted communities in New York City, which are in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Staten Island. It's across the 5 boroughs. These individuals have been identified by the NYPD and the District Attorney's Office in New York City as being likely to be involved in a future incident of gun violence. Gun violence is a really big problem in New York City today, as it is in many countries, many cities across America. Here are some portraits of some of the 500 individuals that we are employing right now. They are ex-veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. They are folks who graduated from foster care. They are survivors of domestic violence. They are people who are returning citizens. I think one of the gentlemen served 17 years and was recently reunited with his family. And our job is to give them a way into the green buildings revolution. We have several workers here, some of whom were incarcerated on Rikers Island, which is the jail in New York City, and we trained them and hired them to install solar panels on Rikers Island in New York City. Here we are decarbonizing a church. We removed fossil fuels from the church and converted to 100% green energy, decarbonized it. We're installing community Wi-Fi to connect low-income families during the pandemic. And so when you employ 1,200 low-income people, lots of interesting things happen. But I think for all of us, the most interesting thing is they start like calling you and texting you about the climate bill in the Senate, right? Because they're up at 2 in the morning watching C-SPAN trying to figure out why the Senate won't pass the climate bill. And that's what happens when you engage leadership and participation and employment for low-income communities and communities of color. So with that, 4 seconds left, I'll wrap. It's good to be with you today and look forward to continuing the conversation throughout the day. Thank you.